This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com with one of my most popular guests, former WWE, WCW, and ECW superstar, ECW world champion, has done it all in professional wrestling, NWA as well. None other than the franchise, Shane Douglas, coming to you from Pittsburgh. How you doing, sir?
What's up, my friend? It's sort of a nice day here in Pittsburgh for the franchise. I'm not big on the heat, and we've been having a beautiful week so far. Nice and about 70 degrees, 68 degrees in the afternoons, and nice blue skies. So perfect.
Yeah, it's been like that up here in Canada too. It's very rare for October.
Yeah, you guys are usually getting cold by now, aren't you?
Yes.
Oof.
Yeah, so it's a welcome change. Now, you were telling me you have a Kiss concert tomorrow night.
Yeah, well, insane because they, the concert's Wednesday night. First of all, I first saw Kiss for the first time when I was a lot younger in 1977 at the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, and have seen them. I've never even kept count, multiple times since. Most of the times they've been to Pittsburgh unless I was on the road. This concert, they were supposed to play like a month and a half, 2 months ago, and I was out of town doing a shot that night, couldn't make it. And then they had to reschedule because Paul Stanley tested positive for COVID, which is sort of strange in itself because they're doing like most concerts are. They're called like in a bubble, so they're all doubly vaccinated. Everybody in the tour, nobody interacts from inside or out. Yet both he and Gene later Simmons tested positive, and they rescheduled for tonight. So not to wish bad on them, but I'm glad they got COVID when they did, and coming back. So this will be the last time supposedly, and playing in Pittsburgh. And from what I hear and what I've seen online, the show looks like an incredible show. So looking forward to it. But the odd thing with the COVID testing that the place requires, the venue requires, is within 48 hours of the show. Well, yesterday I spent the morning in panic because I was calling around to all the places that do testing, and they were all saying 3 to 5 day turnaround, which is sort of counterintuitive. But I was able to get one through my doctor and got the test back today, and still positive or negative on the COVID. So,
Yeah, it's an annoyance for sure, and it's a very expensive annoyance. Just for Kiss, what made you a fan of Kiss? And could you tell us kind of the difference of the concerts that you saw in your younger days to the more recent ones?
yeah, well, first of all, the stage show, right? I was a big comic book fan, and of course, that's led me to professional wrestling. And seeing Kiss when I was right at that ripe age of starting to come into music. I wasn't really paying much attention to music before that, although my brother was always playing, Bob Dylan and all that kind of stuff growing up. Uh, my One of my neighbors, we grew up together. He just sadly passed away a couple weeks, month ago or so. Joey Crut. He had two older brothers, and one of them, he had the albums and brought them over. And I remember looking at the album cover, and they looked so crazy with that makeup and everything. It looked like comic book, right? So I was right into that. Then started listening to the music, and as I got older, started going to see them and the show they had. That was the first concert I've been to, but I'd seen, concerts on TV and things, and they all seemed pretty boring, men or women standing around playing their instruments and singing in what appeared to be street clothes. And suddenly here's these comic book like guys on stage. But funny comment about them, because right around that same time, around 1976, I was spending the weekend at my dad's house. And my dad's an old World War II vet, right? Definitely a different generation. So there's used to be a show on called Night Flight that was doing Kiss every week. They had a different group on it. They were doing Kiss, so it was on around midnight or so. So I told my dad, I said, Dad, this is that group I've been telling you about. So at the end of the show, they have like a concert segment, and my dad came in staring at the TV like this. And right at the end, I said, "What'd you think, Dad?" He goes, "My God, they're wearing lipstick." Just it didn't translate to the generations, but the shows have always been what lured me to them, and their music. I think I love their songs. They've back when they were getting big, they had the critics hated them, right? Their garage band and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of different ways to look at music. Uh, the most intricate music isn't always necessarily the best, but I would contend that somebody that's been able to sell albums and boot a shitload of albums over 4.5 decades, uh, is probably doing something right. And the stage show that they have is, like I've said a second ago, the stage show is just incredible. And this show has them, it's sort of like a good compendium to close with, because they have all these screens stationed up above the top of the stage at different angles. And while they're playing a song, they have the different time frames of them, back when they first started, and then when they were, big with the makeup and nobody, and then they took the makeup off. They have all that playing up above. So it's really a pretty cool bookend. I'm looking forward to it.
Were you in WCW when they did that Kiss character and had the Kiss concert?
Yeah, and messed it up about as badly as they could have messed it up, right? Kiss that was around the time, like right after they had done their first reunion tour, which sold bajillions of dollars of tickets, right? And they, from what I understand, they were signed on to launch each of their characters. The Star Child, the Demon, the Spaceman, and the Cat, right? So Gene Simmons' character, the Demon, was the first. Once they saw what WCW was doing with it, they cut that off pretty quickly. But they debuted that in Las Vegas. We were at the MGM Grand, and the night before, just one of these, crazy things that happens. Dean Malenko and I were sitting in the Carousel, the restaurant in MGM Grand, and because they knew we were with the wrestling, they put us over on the closed side of the restaurant, and we were sitting there just eating dinner. And without my glasses, I see the waiter bringing two guys over toward us. I'm thinking, oh, crap, we're bringing some fans over, right? And then they got closer, and I realized it was Gene Simmons and Doc McGee, their manager. And, I'm a huge Kiss fan, so I'm wigging out, right? But I don't want to be a pain in the ass to them like we're off time with fans, right? So I went to walk by, and I thought, there's no way I can't at least say hello. So I stopped this. Gene, I want to interrupt you. I'm one of the wrestlers. I'm looking forward to seeing it tomorrow night. And we shook hands, and he saw the scar on my elbow, and he said, what happened to you? And I said something quick, like I zigged when I should have zagged, and went to walk away, and he pulled me back. He wouldn't let go of my hand. In hindsight, it seemed to me that Gene was, the businessman he is, was trying to wrap his brain around wrestling. And I asked him to close out the conversation, hey, when you guys get in gear tomorrow, any way I can get a picture with you guys? He said, make sure you find me. So the next day, Doug Dillinger, who was the head of WCW security, and a bit of pain in the ass, as they came out, he starts pushing people back. And Gene saw me and walked over and smacked him on top of his head and said, let him through. So that's where the picture comes from me. I think it's me, Perry, Dean, and I think Chris Benoit with them. And then I got one with them by myself. So pretty cool night.
With your booking mind, how would you have done that Demon character if you could have done it yourself, also being a fan of Kiss?
Well, the Kiss fans are going to draw in, right? You obviously got to put them over. You got to figure out a way to put them over and start getting them into the top tier. They debuted it with Brian, I forget his last name, as the Demon. Shoot, I'm so bad with names anymore. But then they went with Dale Torberg as the Demon, and both pretty good hands. And they just kept beating them and beating them and beating them. And it doesn't take a hardcore fan to know that's not the way to push a character. I would have found a way to try to work them into the top tier, like you're still talking about the time of the Millionaires and the New Blood and all of that, to try to find a way to work them in there between all of that. And but definitely have to push it, and they didn't. They just kept beating the character, and that of course put a quick end to that.
There's a fan watching from Austria and wants to know if you have any memories of wrestling in Germany in 1995 with WWE.
Oh yeah, a ton of them. I love, first of all, I'm German descent, right? Martin. So I love going to Germany and just sort of walking around in the cities, and you can walk around for hours and hours and hours and just not find your way, never see the same thing twice. Really cool though, to me, how they, and I think a lot of European towns are like this, how they keep the old with the new, so you walk through and you find these city centers and things with some really, really old buildings and churches and, just neat old buildings to look at and see. What stuck out of my mind and memory, overarching from that, was when we went into the former East Germany. My dad had been the first Allied soldier to the front gates of Dachau, which was outside of, it'll pop in my head here, Munich, outside of Munich, right? And about 50 miles or kilometers or so. And we all had tour guides with us, like to help us find our way around. But they were going to take me out there early one morning because I'd always heard stories about how the wind doesn't blow there and the birds don't sing. It's like you can still feel the death there. And I desperately wanted to see it because my dad had been there. And the morning that we were supposed to go, they were concerned because it's a 2-lane highway that distance, and they were afraid that if we got out, we wouldn't be able to get back in time before the WWE buses left or WWF then buses left for the next city. So I didn't get a chance to see it. But a friend of mine in Germany has since sent me a ton of stuff from Dachau, like mementos and things, and pretty cool. What really surprised me when we went to Germany was the fan base knowledge of ECW. We had been a pretty small promotion here in the States, and I wouldn't have thought that many people in Germany were aware of it. And I wrestled Razor Ramon in one of the towns, and the whole place was erupting with signs with franchise logos and welcoming to Deutschland franchise Dean Douglas, and and one of us was a little booby faced about that.
There's a fan on here that wants to know if you're going to be in the Dark Side of the Ring XPW episode, since you're still the reigning champion.
Yeah, apparently. They had contacted me, and we were supposed to shoot stuff several months ago, like 6 months, 7, 8 months ago. We were all supposed to fly into Philadelphia. They were going to shoot it in Philadelphia. The week of course, the pandemic, you're a little bit familiar with this. It wasn't easy to travel, and they weren't able to get everybody in, so they delayed. They said they postponed and would call back, and never called back. So I will not be in the episode on XPW. Interested to see what tack they have with it.
Yeah, for sure. Is there any memories you could share with us about XPW? I mean, you've talked about that fight that happened at ECW with us in the past, but what happened there with XPW in general? What was its mistake? Why it didn't last?
Well, when I came on board to book it, I had told Rod Black, the owner, that it was imperative that we keep the porno stuff separate from that because it was too easy, for the naysayers. What we didn't want to do is sort of muddy up the water and have anybody able to take easy shots at us. And so Cody Michaels and I, who was my assistant booker, insisted that they both be kept separate, and we would run the wrestling side and they would run the other side, and the two wouldn't meet. And we had, I can't remember about how long I was there, maybe 6 months as booker. We ran several shows in Philadelphia, sellouts. We sold out LA, and we had other shows that did very well. None of them did poorly. And there was, I can't remember exactly how I learned of it, but I was sending them run sheets for each episode of TV of what I had on there. And, as you know, with a TV run sheet, there's reasons that segment 1 is segment 1, segment 2 is 2, and 3, and so on. And they started telling me they couldn't make tapes to send to me because the tape decks were broken. And I thought, well, that's sort of odd for a company that makes its money by selling tapes. Then I started paying closer attention, and people contacted me, of course, through the internet saying, hey, your promo didn't make sense. The one episode I remember specifically was I was angled with Justin Incredible, and his promo instigated my promo. In other words, I was responding in my promo to what he had said. Instead, they put my promo in segment 1 and put his later in the show, so it didn't make any sense. I was responding to stuff that he wouldn't say till later. And, I was pretty pissed about that because that's an amateurish thing, except when you're the booker, that gets placed on you. So, we had some back and forth about that. And then I found out that they were sort of dabbling some of their talent in LA into the porno stuff and back and forth. And I dropped out. That said, I thought XPW had a very good opportunity to make it. Albeit we had to clean some things up. We had to fix some things. We had to move some talent out and bring some other talent in. They had some very good talent there. Chaos and uh, several guys like that. Again, I'm so bad with names anymore, but they had a good skeleton of a solid crew that we could bring other people in, just like Paul did with ECW. And again, it was just butting heads with Rob and what my vision was, and Cody's vision, and what his vision was, and how he saw running it. So, we had some success there, and he decided, I guess, to go another direction.
Did you happen to see the dark side of the ring that had the big fallout about the plane ride from hell, and Ric Flair, your old friend,
Yeah.
is now in some trouble?
Yeah, it's crazy to me because again, we talk about this all the time, and I think pretty much everybody is, right, just how crazy the world has gotten. Look, I'm all for anybody being held accountable for stuff that they've done wrong in the past, but when you start going 20 years ago, we're seeing things like John today, big issue today, John Gruden, right, resigned as head coach for some things that he said in private emails and things. At what point do we start getting to the thought police? And I don't know specifically what John Gruden did or didn't say, but we're just seeing this sort of same thing play out. Uh, and it seems to me that we're seeing, it play out in a way that one side is, held to account, and another side is sort of not so much. If you're going to do it, that has to be an all or nothing proposition. I think my personal opinion. Uh, but the plane ride from hell, that story has been out there for so long. That I was surprised that it sort of just exploded like it did again with the airing of that. Uh, I there's a lot of thoughts on this, and I for one, if I had done any of the kind of stuff that a lot of these guys on the road had done, I'd be sweating a little bit right now. Luckily I was the boring guy that was usually in my room watching HBO or ESPN. Um, you know, I, I feel pretty safe in saying that there's no skeletons out there like that in my closet, because I'm a firm believer the way I was raised by my mom and dad: treat people like you want to be treated. And I've pretty much led my career like that, thankfully, looking back, because But that said, I don't know about you. I'll speak for myself. I don't want to generalize, but I'm an idiot in a whole lot of ways, and I've said and done a lot of stupid stuff in my life because I'm a human being, far from perfect. Uh, but I'm pretty clear conscience when I say I've never hurt somebody else. I've never taken advantage of somebody else. Uh, and a lot of these guys can't say that, and so I think Flair being the front end of that, getting held to a pretty strict account. Uh, some of these guys and the things they've done on the road, I'd be a little bit worried.
And I know you were at one point friends with Tommy Dreamer. He kind of got his job taken away from him at Impact. I don't know how much they actually pay these days, but I don't even know if he was aware of how everything was being presented
Yeah,
before he made the comment that he got thrown under the bus.
yeah. Tommy's. You said we're friends. We've been friends. We'll be friends. Tommy's a good guy in my book. Uh, what I know what Tommy was trying to do. Tommy wants anybody that doesn't understand, like especially from outside our business, the things that we've seen in our business, and sort of the bubble we live in, and was trying to explain that. When I watched it after all of this hit, it was like a week or so after all of it hit, and the way that they had edited it together, sort of put him in a bad light. Hopefully Tommy can weather through this, because I can tell you, I don't believe Tommy has a bone in his body that advocates that kind of thing. And he even said so much in what he said, but that's what I'm talking about. Like with you could probably take any of the many interviews that we've done and selectively edit, pull a word here, a sentence there, put it together and make me sound like a pretty big jackass. Probably wouldn't be too hard, but yeah, it's a shame to see. But again, it's this world we're living in, and I'm sort of stunned because Tommy is pretty bright, and in the world that we're living in, to go out and say those kind of things, even for no matter how innocent or honest the reasons were, you got to be very careful. And I think a lot of people in the wrestling business are probably taking note of that and worried about being interviewed point forward.
It would be funny to see you do a promo on Ric Flair now that this helicopter trick is out there, and you could really destroy him. But
It's yeah, no, I think the destruction's already pretty much been done. Somebody sent me something that they sent, like they took my picture off of my verifying picture off of Twitter, holding my sign of Shane Douglas, whatever, and put on there, "I told you so." It's yeah, but he's paying a pretty steep price now, so a lot of time to think about it, right?
yeah, at least he seems to be fairly set financially now from the crown jewel payoffs and his
Sure.
daughter and his son-in-law.
Yeah, yeah. So it's looking back, I want to be careful I tread here. Uh, Looking back, the things that I saw back then, I was so mortified by, because it was pretty aberrant behavior, right? It wasn't, I never saw anybody raped or anything like that, for God's sake. I'd have called the police if I did. But 40 something year old man running around the hotel naked, and things, stuff you did back in your fraternity days, like way back when you were a young dumb kid. It just seemed odd to me. But that, again, that was the bubble we lived in, so uh none of us, I mean, who today could sit here and say 20 years from now, 30 years from now, what are the trends going to be? And I don't think that anybody back then would have been able to look at now and see the kind of trends that we're seeing today. Again, I'm glad I was the boring the boring guy on the road.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know you used to be friends with Bruno Sammartino, and I heard a shoot interview with him from like 15 years ago where he was saying he didn't think Ric Flair was a good champion because of that kind of naked running around at bars and hotel behavior. But he seemed kind of bitter at that time. But now, looking at that and hearing these stories, he actually had a valid point because, of course, Bruno never did any of that.
Yeah, again, generational difference, right? Like my dad not willing to accept Kiss because they wore makeup. Um, we all reside in different worlds, and like I try to tell my kids all the time, like, looking at what we're seeing now, uh, who could, again, take a stab at a guess to try to figure 10, 20, 30 years from now where things will be. And that's why whenever I taught history, I used to always say, and I tell my kids this all the time, history must be viewed through a contemporary lens. So if you try to look back even 10 years and apply a 2021 world on that, you're playing a fool's game, because 10 years ago they didn't reside in 2021. The social mores and ethics and morals and things are change with time. Bruno clearly was from a generation, and having been born in Europe, Italy, and seeing the things that he saw as a very young boy with World War II. Those are the things that compelled him to portray the championship the way he did. And there's a picture that I talk about this all the time. But there's a picture that Bruno had. I'd love to have a copy of it. He's sitting in a nightclub, black and white photo, in a corner booth, and he's sitting there with Mickey Mantle, Joe DiMaggio, Sugar Ray Robinson, and somebody else. There's four amazing sports, icon, legends sitting with him, and you can tell that all four of them are just like flipping out because they're sitting with the world wrestling champion. And I think in a lot of ways our business has taken a turn away from the type of stuff that, the way that Bruno would portray the business and the way the business portrayed itself. Uh, that opens a lot of this up to criticism down the road.
Speaking of how little value the world champions have these days, do you think WWE, now that they have legitimate competition with AEW, should get rid of the two brands and these multiple champions? Because it's so confusing if you're not a wrestling fan, who's the WWE champion? And like, I couldn't even tell you.
Yeah, it's next to impossible, right? Because they got 106 belts. I remember seeing in one of the episodes of one of those shows they ran on the network, and Hunter was sitting on a stool in front of a wall of belts, literally like 30, 40 belts behind him. And I thought, well, that's a problem, right? No, if everybody has a belt, the champion isn't special, isn't elevated. I don't know about connecting the two. It does seem to me, and I've talked about this at length in my podcast, Triple Threat podcast. It does seem to me that now, even though the WWE is still winning the ratings battle, by a considerable margin, about 100% or more, uh, the doubling what AEW is doing, it does feel, especially for those of us in the business, it does feel like the momentum has completely shifted to AEW. And, right now they're booking really wisely. They've got a lot of big names, that they've signed, and they're rolling them out in a slow fashion, to keep the cascade rolling. It does have a feel that the momentum has completely switched in their favor. Now, that remains to be seen if they can continue that. It's a hard thing to continue, especially when you're up against a juggernaut like WWE. Uh, but it sure seems to me that right now, with what I'm watching in WWE programming, that they're complacent and flat-footed. I love Bobby Lashley. I've always been a fan of his. Super great guy. But you know, to me, the long road that he had to get to the title, they should really be augmenting that. Bobby Lashley is the champion, and the path he had to take to get there. There's a story to be told there, and it seems to me that they've forgotten how to tell the stories. It's all the booking to me today seems like the fireworks approach. The ooh and ah. Let's shock everybody and surprise everybody and get an ooh and ah that's forgotten 30 seconds from now. Those stories I remember vividly, even though it's been a while. Those were the things, the characters and the stories are what drew me into wrestling as a small kid. Uh, and through most of my career, it was that drove wrestling to incredible heights. And now it just seems that everything's like almost like a pie in the face type of slapstick approach to booking, that I'm not so sure is working. But it certainly seems that AEW has the momentum now. And I've talked about this in my podcast. Can they start to chunk down that difference, that 100% separation in the ratings? Even they're out there crowing about them winning the demographic, and that's a nice win. But on the head to head, you've got to be able to compete numbers wise. And when you see what Rampage is doing, each week seems to be dropping a little bit lower, and that seems to be the AEW model, right? They jump up here and there, and then slowly falter back into their range, that 7, 8, 900,000 range, and they've been keeping it a little bit above 1 million. With the nice rollout, the way they've rolled out CM Punk and Bryan Daniels, keep the fan tuning back in. Uh, the question I have now for them long term to be able to chunk that down will be, can they book all those big name talents and keep them all relevant as they chunk that down, or are they going to pick up some of their favorites like their pets and stick with that? It's a tricky road ahead, like a sort of a minefield ahead for them to book that, to try to break down that separation in the overall numbers.
What do you think about them basically keeping on hiring all these people? They only have about 3 hours of TV, and it doesn't seem like they've even released a handful of people yet. And they keep taking even low card WWE guys now, which I could imagine it might piss off some of the AEW guys that were already on the roster getting pushed further down, but they're still not getting fired. So seems like a bit of an overloaded roster.
Yeah, like you said, with only 3 hours to air each week, how do you make a star out of wrestler A, B, or C? Or keep them elevated, and by paying them the big bucks. I don't care how much money somebody has. Obviously, that's a big boon to have, right? It's a big positive in your corner. But sooner or later, it's always been my experience that the accountants will get involved when something doesn't make sense financially, and it seems to me there's an awful lot of money going out the door when I don't really know how much money's coming in the door yet. I'm sure they're selling merch and stuff like that, but they're up against the behemoth with WWE, and they're going to have to show that they can compete toe to toe, head to head with WWE before they can start to chunk down those numbers and increase the money coming in. But as of right now, I'd still believe they'd have to be in the red.
And last time AEW was in Pittsburgh, I remember it was all over the news. You were backstage. I know you're from Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
How was that experience?
That was great. They were all very cool. A friend of mine, Ned Rolsma, who was a recurring character on How I Met Your Mother. He's the big 7-foot guy. I was, have fun. I'll tell, like, before he shows up somewhere, I say, hey, a buddy of mine's coming. He's a small guy. He's real, touchy about his height. So don't say anything. And he's 7-footer walks in, right? But he had called me. It was literally the week that Dominic DeNucci had passed away. A couple days later, like a day or 2 or 3 later. And he had called me earlier that day and said, hey, he had been to the Wednesday night taping and asked if I wanted to go up to the Friday taping. And I first told him no. And then I thought afterwards, if not, I'm just going to sit here and stare at the walls and, be depressed because of Dominic's passing. So I said, what the hell, let's go. Being around the business, it'd be nice change of pace. So we went up. They had, I was really, really impressed with their setup. Class A. I mean, the lights and the sound and all of that. But we sat behind the stage, up in the stands, watching the show to be away from the fans and just be able to focus on what I was watching. And there were, some things that really stuck out at me that can be improved. That are, really, basic stuff. But there was an air of excitement in the building that you hadn't sensed in a while. That was nice to see. But afterwards, as we were leaving, somebody pointed out that it was the first time that me, Taz, Tommy, and Jerry had been in the same business building since ECW, and I, started thinking about it. Though it's probably right, and we took a picture, I think, with Jeff Jones. And then suddenly, everybody wanted to get a picture with us, which was sort of cool. But yeah, they were very welcoming. It's always great to see guys like Arn and, Taz. I hadn't seen, I'd spoken to him several times, but hadn't seen him in quite a while. And just a whole lot of guys, Jerry Lynn, those type of guys. But they were very welcoming. And again, it was nice to see that kind of excitement in the building. They certainly have, like I said, momentum. The key now for if you look in the past at all the companies that got over that big hill, that big climb, were the companies that showed consistently that they could build on that momentum. And I'm hoping that they can do the same. A rising tide rises all ships, right? And it's good for the business, it's good for the fans, good for the boys. So I hope to see them keep doing that. But again, it's an uphill slog to be able to do that.
Now, you mentioned earlier about Bobby Lashley being champion, which I actually thought he was a good person to have as champion too. But for some reason, he didn't have that long a run and they replaced him with Big E.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, it just seems to me like the sort of slapdash approach to booking, right? Let's just throw it against the wall and see what sticks. Bobby has, again, I don't want to go into his life story because he has an incredible life story. By having him as a heel, and MVP was great with him to get him into that position. But there's such an incredible story to tell there that I think they really missed out by not doing that. And sort of trying to make him into a character when, just his bio is an amazing bio. Tell that story. That's reality is something that, we hear that all the time, reality TV and everything, right? And find out later that most of it's made up. When you have a guy like Bobby that has the career path that he's had, the long climb up the mountain, but an incredible life story to tell, I think you're being remiss not to tell that. That's what I think fans want to tune into, right? That's why they tune in to all of our podcasts and they watching Dark Side of the Ring. They want to hear these other stories that sort of move away from the character-based stuff that we are in wrestling and show a little bit more of our, of our backsides. And again, Bobby has an incredible story to tell that I think they've really missed out on. It seems to me that not just in their champions, but in their booking, like a month or two ago, Jim Cornette had, gone in. Somebody had sent him one of the run sheets for a TV that was, 20 something pages long. That is where, when you start getting into that kind of minutia, you perform, so you know what we do in this business. Some of that has to be left to us as the artist to keep us interested. If it's all just, okay, Shane, you walk this many steps and stop here on your mark and turn this way and say this line at this point, that's not really that interesting to me. And it's been my experience in the business that when you give the guys and the women, first of all, just to preface, like I say in my podcast all the time, when I say the boys, I'm talking about everybody in the dressing room, the men and the women. But when you give the boys you force them to learn the character by being the character, right? So, like when I talk about the franchise character, he's obviously a fictional person, but I've voiced him out for so many years that I can think like this guy thinks because I've thought him out in my head. If I was in the WWE and that character had been created, and you asked me, how would your character vote in an election? My response would be, well, what do the writers say? Everything would resort back to the writers because this has been created in somebody else's head, put in verbiage form for me to read off a teleprompter. So I don't know the character. I'm just portraying something somebody else has created. And that seemed, as I watch their show, whenever I do that, most of the time I get clips sent from my podcast partners because I don't really watch any of the shows, as they air. And when I watch it, it feels to me like what my kids would have been tuning into when they were 5, 8, 10 years old, maybe 12. It doesn't seem like the kind of stuff that would attract people of our generation into watching. Uh, and again, it just seems so controlled and so contrived. That I think they're really missing the boat because with all of those men and women in the dressing room, they're all very talented people, right? I always talk about the wrestlers. We all come out of the schools and we know how to do the body slams and the moves and that kind of thing. When to do them is the critical point. When to not do them is another critical point that needs to be learned. There's a time to speed it up and slow it down. There's a time to stop and glare at the audience. There's a time to engage with somebody, the audience. And if you don't know those things, if it's just all we've spoken it out beforehand and gone out here and regurgitated it, we're not really performing for the crowd. We're performing from rote. And I think that's a big thing in the business that's missing, especially when I watch the WWE. So, they've had that belt again, from just my point of view. To me, champions, when I was coming up, champions were champions for extended periods. Bruno held it, for 12 years, Bob Backlund for 7. Whenever I was, wrestling on television, was given belts, I was given long runs with those belts. But it seems to me like now every time the wind blows, those belts change hands, and it does nothing to really establish any of their men or women as being really preponderant in the business, and it's become too much of a gimmick.
And speaking of people not being interested, apparently in a report from Wrestle Tickets, Raw in San Francisco this week had only 4,031 total fans. The
Wow.
arena holds 19,500 for concerts, and it was the lowest attended Raw since the return to the road.
Wow. Well, if you remember before the pandemic, we were hearing that same kind of thing. They were selling like a third to a quarter of the buildings, and they were trying to pay for a good chunk of it. So is this just a continuation of that? And in that time, AEW has really staked the flag, right? So now there's something that's sort of hip and cool and new out there. We could go on and on about the things that we think are wrong in WWE. But that said, there's always a part of me that holds back with Vince because uh, he knows the business intricately well, right? So is this something that Vince is just doing to, allow them to take on so much salary and taking the guys that he's sloughing off and then turn on the afterburners? I don't know, but that had always been like a thought in the back of my head previously, but it's this time seems different to me because it seems that the WWE has sort of lost the verve, if that makes sense. They every back when I was in WCW competing against WWF, once they had regained the top spot, it was seldom, but there were times that we would have a hell of a taping, and you'd feel good about that taping and feel, okay, we're closing the gap a little bit, and then you'd later that week watch the replay of their show, and it was just phenomenal. And Vince turned on those afterburners. I sense that Vince is losing that afterburner, that he doesn't have that interest anymore. Or, I've heard somebody say that he lost the eye of the tiger. But the show itself does come off as flat to me whenever I watch it. And I remember one time last year, my youngest son, Caden, liked to go to Dominic's house to watch because he wanted me and Dominic to point out what they were doing right and what they were doing wrong. And uh, Dominic was sitting across the room, and he was sitting sort of between us. And I kept hearing him sort of like chuckle to himself, like under his breath. And I'd look over, and he'd stop, and I'd look over each time he did this. And a segment came on. It was sort of like a Piper's Pit type of segment. I don't think it had a name, but they had a woman, a blonde woman out there interviewing Finn Balor. And when he came out, the woman said to him, like exactly like this: "Well, hello, Finn. How are you today?" And he responded back in kind. And my son chuckled. I said, "Okay, what cares? What's all the chuckles about?" He said his exact words, 14 years old at the time. Said, "Dad, I feel like I'm watching a third grade play." And ever since he said that, when I watch these segments that get sent to me, that sort of echoes in the back of my head, and it does come across that way. Allow the talent to be the talent. They'll make mistakes. Most times, though, they'll find the right way. As a performer and as a wrestler, that nobody wants to go out there and keep repeating bad things, right? If the fans don't like it, we usually change it up pretty quickly. But in the gist of doing that, when you jettison off the stuff that doesn't work, and then you find the stuff that works, and you hone that down into a pretty precise character, that's to me like where the magic of wrestling comes. Look at Steve Austin when he was doing the ringmaster gimmick, taskmaster, ringmaster, something like that. Nothing, you really couldn't sink your teeth into it. It's sort of nondescript, same wrestlers, same abilities, become Stone Cold Steve Austin, and records are broken. That was his doing. That was his input. And I don't think I know that the men and women in that dressing room right now have the same type of ideas floating around in their heads. Some of them may not be very good. Some of them might be great, but you won't know if you're just force feeding them to regurgitate something that some writer who's never had a pair of boots or tights on is telling them to do.
Yeah, I know you're friends with Mick Foley, but I heard recently like Mick Foley's son is a writer. We had Ultimate Warrior's ex-wife, but somehow guys like Kevin Sullivan and you are not writers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, counterintuitive, right? You're pushing the pull. Nothing against any of these people that are writing for them. I'm not, taking shots at any of them. But if I said to you today, okay, I want you to sit down and write a screenplay for me, it's going to win an Academy Award. Okay, I don't know. Maybe you are a good writer, but if you ask me to do that, you might as well ask me to grow wings and fly. When you have how many people in this business that have drawn money consistently over the long haul and know how to do it, what's the first question you get asked by any young wrestler? What advice could you give me? Right. Well, back in the dressing rooms that I came up in, that advice was flowing every day and every night in the dressing room, in the ring, in the cars driving to the next place, by guys who would all be future Hall of Famers and legends and icons. So it was like a PhD level learning of professional wrestling by the guys that had done it. Well, we've all been sort of pushed out the door, and now you have a whole lot of people writing for stuff that they've never written before. They may be great writers. They may be able to write a screenplay that gets an Oscar. I don't know. But to say professional wrestling, that is really, it's not a sport. It's not an entertainment. It resides someplace in between. And if you don't understand those nuances and know what will pop a crowd, what will piss a crowd off, what will, make a crowd lose their mind and go crazy. If you've never done that and not really sure how to do it, you're just sort of writing stuff that you think in your mind might or might not work, and most times not going to.
There's a fan on here that's given me a $5 tip, and he says AEW is growing in popularity. Do you see any real star power in the AEW company? We see great athletes, but in his opinion, he doesn't see any characters or guys who are really over.
Well, that again, what I'm saying right now about the WWE, also holds true for them. I thought they really missed it when during the this whole pandemic craziness, when they had to have the empty arena matches. That was a perfect time for them to reintroduce their brand. They've never explained, at least understand. I'm speaking from a point that I watch stuff afterwards. I don't watch the shows as they air. But it seems to me that they've never really explained to the fan base, you know, what makes this character what they are. Like Pac always comes off, and he seems like he's always mad at the world. Why? Why is he mad at the world? Explain that to me as the viewer. And now I'll sort of understand. Will he help an old lady across the street or kick her cane out from under her? They could have done that during the pandemic, and made those shows a little more interesting. Spend half an hour on this character, half an hour on the next character, and have those two with an empty arena match. At least there'd have been some interest going into it. That said, let's face it, Chris Jericho, he's been around the business for a long time. He exudes stardom, right? He knows where the camera is. He knows how to turn it on, as he should, for having been on top for as long as he's been. MJF, he's got star written all over him to me. As a heel, watching him perform and do the things that he's doing, he's really going out of his way to get heat, right? And not worried about his t-shirt sales or whatever. They have an entire dressing room doing the same thing, or not doing that same thing. They're just going out and performing as what they believe they are, but that's never been explained to the masses. And right now the AEW, even though it's coming up on is it 2 years yet, or we're right around? Because I know it was October.
It just happened. They actually just had the 2-year anniversary, and the rating was significantly lower than its debut rating. I'd have to look it up, but I think it was a 0.36, and their debut rating was a 0.66.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that when they debuted 2 years ago, if you recall, that initial week out of the gate, they did like 1.4 million viewers, which was astounding, for a startup. But the next week it dropped to 700,000. About half of the audience dropped out, and it's my belief that was because they had all that time building up to the launch. They were saying that this was going to be like the wrestling you remembered, not going to be the stuff that you don't like and whatever else. I think a lot of fans tuned in and said, well, it sort of looks the same as everything else I've been watching, and tuned back out. But they still are the new entity, right? Even 2 years in, even though they're much more known quantity now than they were 2 years ago. But they still have the opportunity to start telling those stories on that dressing room filled with talent. Create those characters and push them, and now give them storylines that to suck into, to dig their teeth into. Again, I see MJF doing that. Jericho, again, does it incredibly well. But, the few times I've watched the show, it seems to me that there's a whole lot of people on there that I don't know and don't get to understand why their character is what it is. Tell the audience that. The audience, it's like when you're reading a book, right? The main characters in the first few pages of the book are usually laid out in detail so that as you go on reading further into the book, you can add things, take things away, swerve stuff in there. But you have to understand the characters in order to be able to dig into the book.
And they are still doing pretty impressive houses, that 19,000 or whatever in New York. I don't think anyone did a house like that since the 90s in WCW. It does help when your father's worth 14 billion.
Yeah.
But still, it is impressive.
Very much so. If you remember, NXT was doing these kind of numbers, 4 or 5 years ago, selling out some of the big buildings, are coming real close. Again, they have a lot of assets to build on, not the least of which is the 14 billion, from old dad. But again, it's my experience that, having known a handful of billionaires and worked for them, over my time in wrestling, sooner or later, look at WCW and Time Warner, right? I mean, it was, I think the week they got sold did like a 4.6 or a 5.6, something like that. Just astounding, and yet still sold. Sooner or later, when those numbers crunchers come in, the CPAs, and they start looking at something and they say, well, this isn't making enough, or it's not making anything yet. that's what I'm curious about to see with AEW is, they've got a good hold, right? They've launched, they've got a good hold on the audience, and the momentum seemingly gone their way. But if they continue to not explain those characters and keep relying on, okay, well, guess who big name we're bringing in next week and the week after that and the week after that, we talked about a few seconds ago. How do you then push them? You can only showcase so many talents in a 2 hour or a 1 hour shot.
Tommy Gunn wants to know, what was it like working with Goldberg, and are you surprised he's still wrestling? Supposedly still making about $3 million a year, from what I hear.
Bill's a great guy. I'm happy to see these. First of all, still in phenomenal shape. He's super easy to work with for me in WCW. Albeit I think the company didn't do it properly. There was no reason to just feed me up after building that heat to just take it right off of us. I think we could have really built that to something special. But again, that was just endemic to WCW at the time. It's by putting him in there. Look, Bill's not a 60-minute guy, right? Never going to be. Same with Lesnar and some of the others. They're attractions. Showcase them with their strengths as opposed to putting them like a turtle on their back in something they shouldn't be doing. And Bill still being in the shape that he's in and being able to go, if you showcase him in that short, explosive type way, the same as they do with Brock Lesnar, you can keep him protected. Not protect is part of the wrong word. You can keep him elevated, but when you start making somebody who never was a 60-minute guy start to have to put in some time in a place like Saudi Arabia that's 900 degrees, you're probably going to be disappointed at the outcome. When I see Bill and like how he sort of transcends like from the generations, it's reminiscent to me of what I saw in wrestling coming up. There was, like I said before, there were so many guys in that dressing room. It didn't matter who you were working with. They all had 20, 30 years experience and could sure as hell teach you a thing or two. And now with that being sanitized out, these guys and women, they're all in the ring with their peers. So it's pretty difficult to learn from your peers. Mick Foley and I both trained under Dominic. Both became pretty, big names in the business and drew some money. But if Mick and I had gone on the road all those years ago together and only ever wrestled each other, what could I have taught him? What could he have taught me? But by being in the ring with all the other guys that we did and learning over those years, that's where we started to then master the craft. And today, if what I'm hearing is accurate, a lot of the guys won't take that input. Don't care to get it from the guys that have been around, and just want to go out and do their thing. They're limiting themselves by doing that.
Have you seen Rick Steiner's son? I believe his name is Braun Breaker or something. What do you think of him? I know he's still very green, and also them giving him that kind of silly name instead of capitalizing on the Steiner last name.
Yeah, well, now we're starting to get into like trademark law, right? And I can understand that, them wanting to be able to have something that they can control and be theirs. But when you come into the business with an uncle and a father who were pretty big household names in the business, everybody in the building knows who it is, right? So you can call them Tiddlywinks if you want, but everybody knows it's the Steiner. He certainly looks the part. I haven't seen any of his matches yet. I've heard, different things. What I've heard is that he seems a lot more to wrestle like Scotty than Rick. Again, just going off what I'd heard. But I would say with that pedigree, he certainly has a shot. I just, again, I understand the trademark part of it, but if you come in and your dad's name is Bruno Sammartino, to call you Joe Blow seems to me to be spitting in the wind and just all over the trademark stuff. It's confusing. You take, for the fans that may not know who he is, you sort of take all that rub away from having had that pedigree, and it's I guess it's one where I can say both sides of the fence. But me personally, I would have gone with Steiner. It's such a household name in wrestling.
He looks a lot like Rick Steiner too, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
kind of
sounds,
obvious.
yeah, yeah. Certainly looks like a Steiner, doesn't he?
John Falsetta wants to know if you ever got your money from Paul Heyman and if you and Francine are cool now. I know you and Francine are cool now and do appearances.
Yeah, yeah. No, I've never got my money from Paul. Uh, you know, but again, it's been so long ago that to me, it's like again the yin and yang, right? So had it not been for ECW and not been given all the opportunities that I was in ECW, you know, getting to be the mouthpiece for a pretty incredibly talented dressing room that I think really made my career. I had a lot of career before that, and I've had a lot of career after that. But it's the ECW stuff that the fans remember. I give Paul credit for that and thank him for that. But no, I'd never gotten the money. As far as me and Francine, yeah, we're great. We're making an appearance in Tennessee, I think, next month sometime. We text probably, you know, 8, 10 times a day about different things. Uh, she's got a beautiful family. Her mother lives with her and her husband, and that it's like the perfect world for all things for Francine, right? Franny always wanted to be a mother. She has 2 beautiful kids. She's a great husband, and her mother living with her. Things are pretty good in Francine's world, and I'm happy for her. We go out, and when we do make our appearances, uh, it's like the magic is still there. The fans still want to see that, and it's fun for us to replay some of that stuff. But it's and that all emanates from ECW. So I can't whitewash that out, and wish I'd get my money from Paul. But if not for Paul and ECW, would I have had the career that I've had?
He certainly could afford to pay you now if he wanted to. And last question I'll ask today is, sadly, since the last time I spoke with you, your trainer and close friend Dominic DeNucci passed away, WWE Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that? He did live, I believe, to be almost 90.
Yeah, it sounds sort of crazy to say it this way, but I was stunned when I got that phone call. Dominic had always said, he's going to make 105 before he leaves, right? And he was so healthy. I mean, stop and think. At 90 years old, had all his teeth, didn't use a hearing aid, didn't use glasses, uh, ate a pristine diet. It was really, really something with his diet. His body was banged up, obviously from wrestling, and he was almost 90 years old. But he was an incredibly healthy and vigorous 89 years old. He hadn't been feeling well for a few days. Uh, I have no doubt the pandemic really hurt Dominic because Dominic's a people person, had to be around people. And if you ever saw him around people, you understand what I'm talking about. He just like a flower to sun. And he hadn't been feeling well for a couple days. And his daughter took him to the hospital just to play it safe. And they'd over the pandemic, there had been 3 or 4 of these episodes where he'd go to the hospital, overnight, come home tomorrow. When they got him to the hospital, when you ask Dominic how he felt, he'd usually give you a number. I feel 100%, or I feel 95%. If he said 90, that meant he wasn't feeling well. And when Danielle took him just as a precaution, because he hadn't, been acting himself for a couple of days, got him to the hospital, and his blood pressure was 44/40, which is mind-blowingly low. Uh, that he was even still conscious at that level is surprising. So they immediately rushed him back. Got an IV in him. He had an infection shortly before that, and so they started giving him antibiotics as well. Within an hour, his blood pressure had doubled, and he was joking with the doctors and flirting with the nurses, being Dominic. Uh, his daughter went home fully expecting to pick him up the next day, and she got home 15, 20 minutes after getting home, got the phone call that he was gone. Cody Michaels had called me, and ironically, his mother had broken her hip and had surgery that same day. So he had called me earlier and said she was she was in recovery and she was doing well. He said, "Hey, here comes the doctor now. Let me call you back." And maybe 30 minutes later, he called back. I was making dinner, and my hands and stuff were in food, so I couldn't answer the phone immediately. and he called like right back 2 more times, like, which isn't like him. So I started thinking, oh my God, something happened to his mother. So I called him back and I said, Mark, what's up? Is your mom okay? He said, like, stammered for saying, he said, what? Said, Dominic's gone. And when he said, it sounds stupid now, but I said, what do you mean gone? Gone where? Like, did he? Like, I'm thinking, like, it sounds to me like he's left home and they can't find him. And he said, no, he's gone. And when it sunk into me, I mean, I literally, the room spun on me. I felt like I was drunk. It just didn't settle in, and it probably didn't for several weeks. I just kept expecting I can go out to Dominic's tomorrow and see him because he'd always been there. But I'm happy. Whatever it was, he didn't suffer. Like, whatever happened quickly, and I'm happy for him because he deserved that. Dominic was an incredible guy. Really did, gave me my entire career. And was always there as a sounding board. Like, if there was something you weren't sure about or whatever, could always call him. And we were still making appearances. So I'd take him with me on the road, and had taken him to Australia with me a couple of years ago. Just really amazing. But I can tell you this, that the world, when people like Dominic die, the world grows a little bit dimmer because he was just good people. What the world needs more of.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you again. There's been hundreds of questions. We maybe did 15% of them. So we'll have to have you back again sometime. But is there anything you would like to plug before you leave here? Of course, you have the Triple Threat podcast with John and Chad.
Yeah, John and Chad. And I've got a second podcast called Franchised with Brian Resner. We try to find the time to, first of all, I apologize to your viewers and to my podcast followers. I had been out of commission for about a month. This is the first week my voice has really been back. I literally had like a whisper of a voice. I had gotten that summer cold and it settled into my throat. So even now it's a little bit raspy, but it's nice to just be able to talk again. What a cruel thing to take the franchise's voice from him, right? For me, I guess just a little bit of it, like outside of the business, just, with the world as crazy as it is, and people at each other's throats the way they are, we need to find each other ways to love each other and care for each other more than all this attacking and destruction that we're seeing going on. And I say that as a father of 2 kids that I don't want to see living in that kind of a world. My mom and dad used to tell me, if you can't find something nice to say, don't say anything. Right. It's funny for the franchise. Right. But as Troy Martin, I've tried to live my life that way. And, I've found it's worked in my favor far more than it hasn't. So, hopefully we'll see this cloud lift over top of everybody and find the reasons that we are more alike than we are different. And, that's my little soapbox segment, I guess.
Yeah, that's a far cry from your ECW and XPW promos.
Yeah, which that guy was built to be despicable, right? The franchise is supposed to be the guy you hate.
Yes, which I'd love to see more wrestlers with heat, but I won't get into that. Thank you very much for joining us. And he is the Franchise SD on Twitter. You can look him up. Easy to find online. I'll let you close this off however you want. Thank you.
Hey, appreciate you having me on again. Always great to talk to you and your fans. It's one of the best places to find information in wrestling, right? Hannibal TV has been the cutting edge. Tune in next all time to always find out what Hannibal's up to. And appreciate you guys watching. Appreciate the questions and everybody tuning in. Be safe, everybody.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews.